A 911 call, a black teenager, and a mother who arrived just in time. But what happens when the truth hits harder than the accusation? The sun hung low over Brookstone Estates, an affluent neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where the lawns were perfectly edged, the driveways were freshly sealed, and the sidewalks barely had a crack. It was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the occasional dog bark or the hum of a luxury car rolling down the street. 16-year-old Elijah Brooks adjusted the strap on his gym bag as he walked, his headphones blasting music that drowned out the world around him. He had just finished a grueling basketball practice at Franklin High, and after a long day of classes and drills, he was exhausted. Normally, he'd take the bus home, but today he decided to cut through Brookstone. He wasn't unfamiliar with the neighborhood, his best friend lived just a few blocks away, but he also knew it wasn't a place where people expected to see someone like him walking alone. And inside one of those pristine homes, behind a large bay window, Linda Cartwright was watching. Linda had lived in Brookstone Estates for 15 years. She knew every face, every car, and every routine on her street. And right now, something didn't sit right with her. A teenage boy, black, tall, athletic build, walking alone, a bag slung over his shoulder. She felt a twinge of concern. Or was it something else? Linda reached for her phone and hesitated. Maybe he was just passing through. Maybe he had a reason to be here. But doubt crept in, fast and unrelenting. What if he was up to something? What if she ignored it, and later that night she saw a story on the news about a break-in just a few houses down? She felt a pit in her stomach. Better safe than sorry, right? Linda took a deep breath and dialed 911. Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. But Linda didn't know that Elijah wasn't just any teenager, and she definitely didn't know who his mother was. Linda kept her eyes on Elijah as she spoke to the dispatcher, her fingers gripping the phone just a little too tightly. He's walking down my street, looking around like he's scoping out houses. I don't know who he is, and he's carrying a bag. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. Can you describe him? Linda's lips tightened. He's, tall, black, wearing a hoodie, gym shorts. He has a bag, I think. I don't know, but it doesn't look right. The dispatcher asked if the young man was doing anything illegal. Linda hesitated. Well, no, not exactly. But I've never seen him before. This is a quiet neighborhood. That was enough. The dispatcher assured her that officers would be sent to check it out. Linda hung up, still watching as Elijah stopped briefly to switch his playlist. He had no idea what was coming. A few streets away, Officers Bennett and Rodriguez were in their squad car when the call came through. Possible prowler, Brookstone Estates, male, black, mid-teens, carrying a bag. Bennett, a stocky officer with 15 years on the force, glanced at Rodriguez, who was younger and still learning the ropes. Let's check it out. With that, they flipped on their lights and sped toward the neighborhood. Elijah was 2 blocks from home when he heard it. The sharp whoop of a police siren behind him. He turned, confused, just as the squad car pulled up fast. The doors flew open. Hey! Stop right there! Elijah froze, pulling out his headphones. 2 officers stepped out, hands near their holsters. What's in the bag? Bennett demanded. Elijah blinked. My basketball gear? Where are you headed? Home. His voice was steady, but his chest tightened. He knew this wasn't just a random stop. Rodriguez stepped closer. You live here? Yes, sir. A few blocks over. Bennett scoffed. That right? What's the address? Elijah started to answer, but before he could, Rodriguez grabbed his bag. Hey, that's my stuff. Relax, Bennett muttered, unzipping the bag and rummaging through it. Shoes, a sweaty jersey, a water bottle. Nothing suspicious. But Bennett wasn't done. "Why'd you cut through this neighborhood?" Elijah's heart pounded. "It's just a shortcut. I'm not doing anything wrong." Rodriguez looked at Bennett, uncertain. "Maybe he's telling the truth." Bennett didn't budge. "Then why'd someone call the cops on him?" Elijah opened his mouth, but his breath caught as he noticed something over the officer's shoulders. A sleek black SUV rolling toward them. It pulled up, stopping sharply. The doors opened, and out stepped Denise Brooks, the mayor of Columbus. But the officers had no idea who they had just stopped, and neither did Linda. The air seemed to shift the moment Denise Brooks stepped out of the SUV. She wasn't just any mother. She was the mayor of Columbus, and she carried herself like it. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer and heels that clicked against the pavement, she moved with purpose. Not running, not panicked, but controlled. A woman who was used to walking into rooms where people doubted her authority and reminding them exactly who she was. Her eyes locked onto the two officers standing over her son. Her son. Bennett's posture stiffened as she approached. He had seen her before, on the news, at city meetings, but it took a second for his brain to catch up to the moment. Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling a situation." Denise didn't flinch. "Oh, I see that." Her voice was smooth, but sharp enough to cut through steel. "And what exactly is the situation?" Elijah exhaled, relief washing over him. "Mom." She held up a hand, a silent message. "I've got this." Bennett cleared his throat. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area." Denise arched a brow. "Suspicious?" Rodriguez gestured to Elijah. "We stopped him to ask some questions. We need to confirm if he actually lives here." Denise let out a slow, measured breath. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and held it up. "That's my son." On the screen was Elijah's student ID, their address, and a picture of the two of them at a community event just last month. Silence. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Bennett's jaw tightened. Denise wasn't done. "So tell me, did you stop him because he was suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong?" Neither officer answered. Behind them, Linda stood frozen in her doorway, watching the entire thing unfold. She had recognized Denise the moment she stepped out of the SUV, and the moment she put the pieces together, her stomach dropped. She had called the police on the mayor's son. She had called the police on a kid who was just walking home. And now she was standing there, watching as a mother, who happened to be one of the most powerful women in the city, stared down two officers who suddenly had nothing to say. But just because the officers had gone quiet, didn't mean Denise was done talking. Denise took a slow step forward, her eyes locked onto the officers. The air felt heavier now, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what she'd do next. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't have to. Her voice was steady, precise, cutting. "You searched his bag. You questioned where he lived. You assumed he didn't belong." Bennett squared his shoulders. "We were just following procedure." Denise tilted her head slightly. "Procedure?" Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "We got a call about a suspicious person." Denise took another step. "A teenage boy. Walking home." Neither officer had an answer for that. Elijah rubbed his hands together, still feeling the sting of being treated like a suspect in his own neighborhood. Denise turned, finally looking directly at Linda, who stood frozen in her doorway. "Was it you?" Denise asked. Linda opened her mouth, then shut it. The weight of the moment crushed her. She didn't mean for this to happen. She didn't think it would go this far. She wasn't racist, she told herself. She was just being cautious. But now she was staring at a mother, one who had to leave her job, rush into her own neighborhood, and defend her son from the police over nothing. Linda's face turned red. She swallowed. I just thought... Denise cut her off. You thought what? Linda had no answer that wouldn't make her sound exactly like the person she never wanted to believe she was. Denise's gaze didn't waver. Do you know what could have happened here? Linda looked down. Elijah could have been tackled, arrested, slammed against a squad car for resisting, or worse. And all because a woman who had lived in the same house for 15 years decided that the sight of a black teenager with a gym bag was enough to dial 911. Denise didn't need to say it. Linda already knew. The officers knew too. But instead of apologizing, Bennett shifted. If there's no issue here, we'll be on our way. Denise exhaled sharply. That's it? Rodriguez hesitated. Look, we were just responding to a call. Denise shook her head, disappointment settling in. Yeah, you were. She turned back to Elijah and put a hand on his shoulder. Come on, baby, let's go home. Elijah slung his bag over his shoulder and followed his mother to the SUV. The officers walked back to their squad car, muttering under their breath. And Linda? She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, watching them drive away. But for Elijah, for Denise, for every black family that has had to explain their existence in spaces they have every right to be in, this wasn't over. The ride home was quiet. Elijah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, replaying everything in his head. The flashing lights, the way they searched his bag like he was a criminal, the way the officers had looked through him, not at him. Denise gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She knew this moment would come eventually. She just didn't think it would happen so soon. After a few minutes, she spoke. You okay? Elijah let out a slow breath. I don't know. She nodded. I get it. He turned to her. What would have happened if you weren't there? Denise's stomach clenched. She didn't have an answer she wanted to say out loud. Instead, she reached over, squeezing his hand. You did everything right. Elijah sighed. And it still didn't matter. Denise looked at him then, really looked at him. A 16-year-old kid, still sweaty from basketball practice, still carrying the weight of a moment that never should have happened. She knew this wasn't just about today. It was about every story like this, every kid like him, every parent like her who had to teach their children how to move in a world that saw them as a threat first, a person second. And across the neighborhood, Linda sat in her living room, staring at the phone in her hands. The same phone she had used to call 911, the same phone that could have been the reason Elijah never made it home. Her stomach twisted. She thought she was being cautious. She thought she was protecting her neighborhood. But now, she realized she had just been afraid, and for the first time, she had to ask herself, afraid of what? She looked at the screen of her phone, and then, for the first time, she asked herself the question she had spent her whole life avoiding. What if the danger wasn't him? What if it was her? Now, ask yourself, how many times has a call like this ended differently? How many stories like Elijah's don't end with a parent showing up just in time? And how many times do people like Linda get to walk away, never thinking about it again? This isn't just a story about one afternoon in one neighborhood. It's a reality that plays out every day. Maybe it's time we stop pretending not to see it. Maybe it's time we do something about it. If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. Talk about it. Learn from it. Because the next time someone like Linda picks up the phone, the person on the other end might not be as lucky as Elijah.